Hey everybody, welcome to our live webinar. My name is Rob Ryan. I'm the founder of Gussie's Gut. That's gussiesgut.com. We are so happy to sponsor this web series, and we're really excited to share with you the discussion between Dr. Billinghurst and Dr. Thompson. So, real quick, I'm going to introduce the man that is going to lead the hour. He needs very little introduction. He's been a vet for over 35 years, the father of raw food and the barf diet, all around incredible human being, as great as any dog that I've ever met. This is Dr. Ian Billinghurst.
Hi there, Rob. What an introduction. Thank you. Some of it hopefully is true. We're not sure about that. But today we're meeting with one of the most impressive veterinarians on this planet, Dr. Nick Thompson. Now, not Dr. Thompson or Nick. I've known Nick for a long time. We've been friends, compatriots in the raw feeding business, industry, whatever you want to call it. And like myself, Nick is an acupuncturist. Well, I'm sure he's a better one than me. I never actually finished the course, didn't actually get to China, but I passed all the exams, let me say, Nick, just in case you were wondering, and I'm sure you were. So he's been a vet for over 30 years in the United Kingdom. Very quietly spoken is our friend Nick, but very impressive gentleman. He's a published author, multiple publications, and I actually don't think I've read too many of them, but I'm aware of this brilliant thing about him. I've only written a couple of books, but he has really got out there and made some major contributions in the world of science, raw feeding, and the veterinary industry generally. This is most important, he's the founding president of the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. How brilliant is that? That he's actually got a group of vets together who feed raw. And this group now works tirelessly on spreading the message that raw feeding of our companion animals is really the most brilliant way to improve their health. And so isn't that wonderful? And he's getting more and more vets on board every day. He has an amazing show, Facebook Live, with Raw Pet Medics, and that is something to really look at. And we've got a few of them on screen there. Brilliant men in their own right. And I think we're going to be speaking to a couple of those in time. So without further ado, let me introduce Nick Thompson, a true champion of raw feeding. Good morning, Nick.
Well, good evening, Ian. It's really lovely to see you. How are you, my friend?
I'm extraordinarily well, I must say, which I'm not quite sure why, but it may be because some of the food I eat is raw.
Good. It's great to see you. I hope Roz is well.
Roz is doing well too. We're both doing well. We've both actually moved our location. We're now living on the coast in beautiful downtown Berry on the south coast of New South Wales. Anyway, I've got a few questions I'd like to get stuck into with you, because one of the first things I really want to know is how on earth, what made you start feeding raw? What made you interested in raw food?
It was you. Yeah. No, and guys, we haven't planned this conversation. We haven't planned this conversation.
Tell me. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. You surprised me because I wasn't expecting that answer.
It was, yeah. We've got a slight delay, so whenever I say anything, I'll leave a second before saying anything else. It was you, and I was just saying to everybody, we have not planned this conversation. I promise. We're flying by the seat of our pants here, and I really like that, because Ian and I could talk forever on raw food, and you're going to get a little slice of that this evening or this morning, depending on where you are. So it was your book. It was your first book. A mate of mine went over to Australia. Peter Gregory, lovely homeopathic vet, went over to Australia to do some teaching over there, and he came back with this little white book. And I looked at it because I'd grown up with hills, and we'd been feeding kibble at the practice I was at. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, yeah, all very well. And one of the homeopathic vets that I worked with had said, if you get the right remedy, doesn't matter what you feed. And that's kind of where my mind was in that, because I was just studying homeopathy at that stage. And so I looked at the book and thought, oh yeah, that's all very well, and didn't really pay much attention, if I'm honest. But within the homeopathic tradition, there is a phenomenon which is to eliminate obstacles to cure. And it suddenly struck me that poor nutrition is possibly the most enormous obstacle to cure. And so and I'd been raised, my mother was a nurse, my father was a doctor, so we'd always been raised thinking about nutrition, healthy food, and avoiding ultra processed food and what have you. And so I almost woke up one morning and thought, he's got it right. That has to be the way. It was just the penny dropped, Ian. You dropped the penny and it hit me, and it just suddenly struck me that this is a simple, obvious solution. You know, it's a bit like the paperclip. The simplest solutions to any given problem are often the ones that persist the longest. So I ran with it. I read and read and read, and I spoke to people and started working with the very early raw food companies, and friends gradually came out of the woodwork as being interested in raw food, and we all came together until 2014, and we'd been talking about setting up the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society for probably 5 years prior to that. I'd spoken to various people, and then just suddenly one November, I said, right, that's it. I've had enough. We have got to do something about this. So I sent an email to every vet that I could think of, who was even vaguely, who I may have known and may not have known, who was vaguely interested in raw food. And that was probably about 20 people, which is pretty good considering this you know, this was 2000 conference. We had a first conference in about February of that year, and I again sent out lots and lots of invitations, and everybody who was there sent out lots of invitations, and I thought there would be perhaps 20 people coming along. So I hired a tiny little hall just up the road from where we live here in Slaughterford in Wiltshire, where my kids went to playgroup. And I thought, I want the smallest hall in Wiltshire so that we don't rattle, you know, because I thought 20 people in a hall, we're going to feel very, very lonely. But you know what, Ian? I'm sure you would have been there had you been anywhere close by. We had 85 people, and it was standing room only. Well, they were sitting down, but it was very, very, very full, and it was vibrant. It was an electric atmosphere. We ran out of food, so the last third of people didn't have any food because we didn't have enough food to feed them lunch, but they were okay. They didn't care, and you know, the rest is history, as they say. That's the Raw Feeding.
How it all began for the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, Nick, with a very healthy fast.
Yes, it's a good way to start. Exactly.
One thing I want to pick you up on is not pick you up on, but one of the things you mentioned was that you were taught in homeopathy that it doesn't matter what you feed so long as you get the remedy right. Now, the thing that got me into raw feeding was I went to study acupuncture because I had discovered I did a weekend course with David Gilchrist, if you remember that.
Yeah, he's the Greyhound. He's the Greyhound man, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. And he's still around, I think. Anyway, and I found that in expert hands, whacking needles into animals actually made a difference. I couldn't believe it. Me using Chinese torture on animals, alive and well and non-anesthetized, actually had a positive effect. So I went to study human acupuncture, and during that course I met a load of what I thought at the time were fairly kooky young people, and they were young at that stage because I was relatively young too. And what I learned from them was that, and this was very important, they said, well, unless you get the diet right, and this was a number of them, none of these things work, whether it was herbalism or homeopathy. And it suddenly occurred to me that actually nutrition was the king of healers. And that's where it all started for me, because I'd already was on the path of noticing that the people that paid my bills were the non-raw feeders. Whereas the people who fed raw, and this was a time in Australia when people just went to the butchers and bought bones and fed table scraps, these people had made no difference to my bottom line. They would bring their dog in when it was about 20 or over 20 years of age to be euthanized, and it would be a young family absolutely in tears because this dog that had all their life and it was now suddenly had gone downhill. It had reached its use-by date. It was actually aging in the way we're supposed to age, very rapidly at the end of life. And they couldn't believe it. And of course, I had to put it down. And I'd never seen these people before be vaccinated. So this was to me, what you that raw feed was effective beyond the idea that it was a good idea and perhaps any germs or thoughts that were in my book. What convinced you?
What convinced me was just trying it. Yeah, I spoke to clients. I said it with herbs, remedies, and what have you. Let's try this food thing. It's on paper, it seems a logical thing to do. Let's give it a go, because vets are very practical people, Ian, as you well know, and they will often not believe the thing until they've actually seen it. They've actually experienced it themselves. And so I did exactly that. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. The drugs weren't sufficient. Yeah, they'd been to the vet many times, and the vets had tried everything in their toolbox. You know, vets have got a limited toolbox, just as mechanics have got a limited toolbox. But they weren't able to. They weren't using raw food, which I think the mother of all wrenches in the toolbox. I really think it's the fun. In fact, I think it's actually the toolbox itself. Yeah, you put your wrenches in and your hammer in and your screwdriver in, but for me, the raw food is that which contains everything else. I think if you're doing fancy medicine, if you're doing acupuncture, if you're doing homeopathics, what have you, that's great. But if you're going to send them back to eating an ultra processed food, I think that's a really sad and for me, not perhaps the best medicine. We know that, you know, who was it who said, "Let food be thy medicine"? Galen or one of the greats, one of the old greats. Let food be thy medicine. And so it really struck me that if you've got the diet right, you may not need medicine. And so I always say to my clients, and you probably say something similar, is the best vet is the vet you just don't need to talk to, because your dog is healthy, because your cat is healthy, your horse is healthy, whatever it might be. So my advice to everybody is where possible, if the dog is healthy, you know, keep away from the vets. Health checks, annual health checks, obviously a great idea, just so that the vet can give them a check over. But generally speaking, whatever you can do to keep your animals healthy and keep away from the vet is got to be a great thing to do.
Indeed, it is, Nick. Thank you for that. I love that. In fact, I want to write a book called The Lazy Vet, because that's me. Because if you're recommending raw food and people adopt it, half the time you don't have to do too much diagnostic work. You don't have to do too much treatment work, or any sometimes. The animals just get better. And that was the thing that struck me. They just got better when you changed their diet. And so, and I thought, why is this so? And it eventually struck me that what we were feeding is the evolutionary program of nutrition. And can I get you to talk a moment about evolution and nutrition? Have you given that a great deal of thought in your professional life as a raw feeding veterinary
I very
surgeon?
much have. Yeah, I very, very, very much have. And I've looked at animal nutrition, dog nutrition, and I've looked at human nutrition, and everything I see tells me that ultra processed food really just doesn't. I don't think we can expect optimal health when we're feeding diets which depart substantially from an evolutionary diet. Dogs have arguably been eating whatever they can find for the last 45 million years. And then we come along as human beings and we say, well, this is, I'm talking the 50s, or maybe even before, with Kennel ration tins of horse meat. We're saying we can do better than Mother Nature. We can put in a tin everything they need. We can put in a bag everything they need. And I think that is pride beyond, that is conceit beyond belief. And inevitably, we've got it wrong very many times with taurine, with calcium phosphorus ratios, with when we make mistakes with vitamin D levels within tins. All these problems that we've had trying to create a processed food when we don't really need to, because Mother Nature has provided us with meat and bones and organs and vegetable material and everything that we need to provide ourselves and our dogs and our all our animals with what they need. So from an evolutionary, I think it's a cut and dried conversation. This is what they have evolved to eat, and the further you depart from that evolutionary model, the more you you risk inducing disease through diet, not necessarily deficiency disease, but all sorts of diseases that you may not have even thought might have come along. So possibly autoimmune disease, possibly behavioral problems, possibly subtle but profound changes of the microbiome. Now, the microbiome is something we very, very, very much have to talk about, because we're not actually feeding just the dog. We're feeding the microbiome, which feeds the dog. And so if we've got a diet which promotes the microbiome, as it has for millions of years, it's only logical that if we change that dietary structure, we get a change in microbiome. And we all know when you change your biome, you get a change in immunity, you get a change in behavior, you get a change in nutrient absorption, fatty acid absorption, B vitamins, and all of these things will they will change. So that's a very long answer to say, I think that feeding an evolutionary guided diet, we can improve on an evolutionary diet, because we're not feeding grey wolves, we're feeding our modern dog. But I think that is the fundamental palette from which we should choose our foods.
Thank you, Nick. That's a great answer. And it's interesting what you said then, that we can improve on the evolutionary diet because our dogs are not grey wolves. And of course, evolution never stops. So our dogs have continued to evolve. And so we have to take that into account, most definitely. And when I talk about this in lectures and so on, I do speak about the evolution from the time that man became involved with the dog and then moved on. The other point you raised was the microbiome. And of course, modern medicine is now understanding the importance of the microbiome, and isn't that wonderful? And we've known about it for a long time. And one of my problems as I saw it, I wanted always to include bacteria in the food, because I knew that, I knew that wolves, for example, would inevitably eat some of the gut contents of the animals, and indeed in difficult times that's what they would eat that. And this would include fermented foods. And this was one thing that had been missing for a long time. And I knew this, but I thought, I don't know how to do this. For example, I wanted in Australia to say, can we possibly put in the ruminal contents? The regulating authorities wouldn't allow this. And
that's brilliant, Ian. Yes, I'm going to jump in there, because in the old days there used to be a thing called Leo Cud. I'm not sure if you had it in the States. It was by an old company. I'm talking in the 90s here, early 90s. There was a green powder that was made from rumen contents of cows, and when you've done an operation or you're giving antibiotics or what have you, you would open this yellow bag of this stuff called Leo Cud, and it was dried ruminal contents, and you'd put it into the stomach to restart the bacteria. And so a couple of years ago, I looked to see whether this still existed, dried rumen contents from cattle, and I couldn't find any. But wouldn't that be wonderful? Maybe we will talk to Rob about that to see if he can get some really clean grass-fed beef rumen contents, freeze dry it, and we can use that as in some capacity. I think it would be really, really exciting.
Let me add to a bit more to that, Nick, too, because I spoke to some he was actually a German, but he lived in the United Kingdom. And he said that during the Second World War, the only thing they could feed their dogs on was actually from the abattoirs, and it was rumens that was thrown away. And their dogs absolutely thrived. So I've known for a long time. And I have to say, people will be asking, why have you wearing Gussie's gut on here? Because when Rob got to me and told me what he was doing, I said, that is what we need. We need to. This is the missing key ingredient that has bothered me for such a long time. And of course, that's why I'm here promoting it. But it's so good to talk to you about the microbiome. There's a lot we have yet to learn about the microbiome. There are some books I'm reading that tell me that you can throw in the right bacteria and suddenly cure everything. Well, I'm not quite sure about that. I also know that if you feed the right food, the right bacteria are going to feast on it. So Can I get you to comment on some of that? Because I got a feeling you're far more learned in this area than me.
I'm not sure if I am, Ian, but I'll give you my penneth for the sake of it. The first thing to say, there's a lovely book by Rodney Dietert, Dietert, which I've read, called The Human Superorganism. And he says, basically, he's a microbiology researcher, I think. He's not a doctor. But so it's, in a way, he can stand away from the medical paradigm and just look at, what is the microbiome? What is a human being? He's talking about people, and where does one stop? Where does the other start? And he's saying that actually he talks about the holobiome, i.e. the whole thing, and your and my microbiome ends about a foot or two away from our body, because we have all these bacteria, and there's just an aura of bacteria surrounding us. So it goes all the way out to there. This is me holding my hands right out, but you can't see it because I'm too close. So it goes all the way out there. You've got 10 times more bacterial species, but bacterial bugs in your body than you've got in Billinghurst cells. So you've actually got you and your dogs have 10 times or so more bacteria in them than they have dog cells. So that's pretty remarkable. The gut is the second biggest concentration of nervous tissue after your brain. We've all been, since Descartes and all of these people, we've all been very brain orientated, but actually the gut is a massive, and not, the brain sits on its own like a lofty king sitting away from the rest of the population, but the gut is equally clever and equally active with nervous tissue, but it gets down and dirty with the proletariat, with the bacteria. It has an ongoing conversation with the bacteria within the gut, and hopefully they've got a good spectrum of bacteria within the gut, and it holds conferences on a minute by minute basis between the gut and the brain, and thus there's a wonderful book by Cryan, Cryan, an Irishman, called the Psychobiotic Revolution, and he says if the bacteria control the brain, then the bacteria control everything, which is really, really interesting. It's a lovely book and very, very readable as well. So if anybody's interested in this, and I think most people watching today, if they're interested in fermented food and promoting health and behavior and what have you, the Cryan, Cryan's the Psychobiotic Revolution is a cracking book to dive into. So yeah, again, that's a very long way of saying that the microbiome is, we're only scratching the surface. I would love to be about in 50 years time. I don't think I will be, but I would love to.
Now I'm working on that, Nick.
You're working good, man. Fabulous. I would love to be about in 50 years time for many reasons, but to be purely selfish, I love to see what the research over the next 50 years has delivered as regards the microbiome and how it interacts with the body, but also if we're able to manipulate the microbiome in order to promote health. And I would hope that we wouldn't be doing that artificially. We would be doing it through, we would learn about foods and about nutrigenomics so that we can manipulate it in a much more natural way. And I think that's fascinating.
Let me jump in there, Nick. I think you're 100% right. That's the way forward. And of course, that brings us full circle back to raw feeding. But let me ask you this question. How do you see the current conventional veterinary world? Are they accepting or interested in or knowing about the microbiome? That's the first part. And secondly, to what degree do you see the veterinary profession currently as becoming more accepting of raw, or are they becoming less accepting? Tell me your thoughts, your knowledge in that area.
Okay, two questions. So first, vets and microbiome. I think that vets are becoming more and more aware of the microbiome, but we don't have many really strong tools to influence the microbiome. Okay, we've got metronidazole, for example, is a great way to ruin the microbiome, but we haven't got many tools. Vets like really chunky, bold tools with which they can get results, you know, as rapidly and as gently and successfully as possible. And we haven't really got that. We have got probiotics and they can be useful, but we've got a very limited range of probiotics. So I think vets are aware and they're just waiting for more tools with which to manipulate for the better the microbiome. The second part of your, as a bloke, Ian, I can only concentrate on one thing at a time. So you're going to have to remind me the second part of your question.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know to what degree the veterinary profession, as you said today, is becoming more or less or differently, perhaps, accepting of the raw paradigm. How is that going on?
Vets and raw, yes. It's a lot better than it was. I can remember being at dog shows in the early days, and vets would actually come along and give you a hard time to your face and then storm off. I've seen that before. But I think vets are not really taught about raw food, and there's a degree of fear about the subject. And I would welcome any vets watching tonight to please engage Yeah, get in touch with Ian, get in touch with me, get in touch with the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. We welcome you with open arms. If you're critical of raw and you've got well thought out criticisms, then bring it on. I'm very happy to engage with you with regard to those questions. But don't be scared. It's safe, it's economic, it's easy, and the transformational potential, especially for gut and skin, and let's face it, that's a lot of what we see on a day-by-day basis, gut, skin, and behavior. The transformational possibilities with raw food is really very, very extraordinary. So all the vets I know are massively committed to the health of the animals under their care, and I just want to help them bridge the gap between dog in distress with gut, dog in distress with skin, raw food, and a path potentially to a simple road to cure, to infinite improvement in gut and skin condition, in many gut and skin conditions. I see it every day. You see it every day. You change the diet, you get them on going on to raw, and just the disease process disappears. This is a very, very common for you, common for me, common for everybody in the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. And so please do, if you're watching this, you're a vet nurse, you're a vet tech, you're a vet, don't be scared. Just give us a shout, and we'd be very, very happy to engage with you.
Nick, as a vet, I've managed to get it down to 3 B's: bugs, bones, and balance. These are the things that worry veterinarians about raw food: the presence of bugs, the dangers of bones, and the question of nutritional balance.
Yes.
Just thinking about bugs for a moment, and thinking about things like Campylobacter, Salmonella, E. coli, that sort of bug, do you think that they have a role to play as part of the microbiome? And if they do, what is that role?
Yeah.
And how does that marry in with other bugs?
I think it's really important. I think one of the benefits of raw food is that it does contain low levels of these pathogenic bacteria, which help to tone the gut immunity, so that if you get a really good dose of these things, you're better protected. It's almost like you're vaccinating the dog on a daily basis, because there are low levels of these bugs, a little bit of E. coli, a little bit of Campylobacter, a little bit of this, that, and the other, lots and lots of different bugs. And the reason that I'm very confident that these very low levels are very beneficial is because we don't see in anything like the numbers that our detractors think we should see. Yeah, the most conventional vets are absolutely terrified that if you feed any type of raw food, you will immediately create an infectious gastroenteritis, and we just don't see that. We see dogs who've been eating raw food from puppyhood until old age, and they've never demonstrated infectious gastroenteritis. And if they have, it's really no more than their kibble equivalents. So I really think it's the whole bacteria within raw meats, and they are at a low level because in the UK and in Europe, these are human grade meats that we are feeding our dogs, and so they're very, very good. The difference between us humans, we cook our meat generally, not always, but we cook our meat. But dogs have evolved to deal with a certain level of bugs, and we know that they're still doing that. Even the Cavalier King Charles, even the Coton de Tuileries, these are really quite delicate little dogs, but even they can do very, very well on raw food, as well as the Rotties and the German Shepherds and all these big tough guys. They all do very, very well on it, which means that they haven't drifted too far from their original evolutionary physiology. So bugs, I don't really have a problem with. There was very interesting. There was a paper recently where they looked at how salmonella persisted even in when you put a dish in the dishwasher or you used bleach, that the bacteria persisted. And what was interesting was that they took this mince, and they found that the mince didn't have enough bacteria in it. This is raw mince. They didn't have enough. And so what they had to do, they had to inoculate the mince with salmonella in order to contaminate the bowls, in order to do the cleaning trials to see how much salmonella hung about. So it's a very strange situation we find ourselves in. So I feed my dogs raw food. Obviously, I've raised 2 kids in the face of dogs with raw food. They are fit as a fiddle. They've been to the my son's been to the doctor once for impetigo. It wasn't even a gut thing. My daughter has been once because she got bitten by a tick. But apart from that, no gut problems, no, fit as a fiddle, very, very well. That is N equals 2 because I've got 2 dogs and 2 kids. But I can show you hundreds of vets who are in exactly the same situation, and I can show you tens of thousands of owners of dogs who've had raw fed dogs for years and years and years. And then you've got there's a paper by Johanna Anturenimi in 2019 where they looked at 16,500 households all around the world, and we're looking at infection from raw food, and they found there was possibly only 3. So this is 16,000 households. Some of them had dogs for many years. Some of them had multiple dogs, and when you multiply up from 16,000, you're dealing with several 100,000 dog meal experiences, and there was only 3. In fact, it's interesting, in the Helsinki paper that I'm describing, they actually found you're more likely to get an infection if you've got children at nursery school than if you feed your dogs raw food, which is hilarious, and that's wonderful. I enjoy sharing that with colleagues. There's another paper by Nikki Kamak, Cammack, and that came out last year, 2021, and she did a similar survey, about 5,000, and she found that there was no correlation between the raw feeding and infectious disease. So it's very safe, guys. I would suggest that you're probably more likely to get problems from handling other food types, dried food or tinned food, without washing your hands. You're probably more likely to get problems there. And so therefore the bottom line is, whenever you handle dog food, surprise everybody, just wash your hands after you've finished. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Nick. Absolutely brilliant. That's because what you've spoken about there, and we get told, look, most of this stuff, the pejorative remark is that it's anecdotal, but you've just discussed some enormous epidemiological studies, and we're all becoming epidemiologists are now the new heroes in our world with COVID, and people are beginning to understand epidemiology. So your epidemiological studies that you've just mentioned really put the icing on the cake for showing just how safe raw food is. Now, I have another question for you in relation to the 3 Bs. Can you tell me how many, in your experience as a vet, how many diagnosed nutritional deficiencies or excesses have you seen over the years, A, from feeding raw, and or B, from feeding commercial pet food? So do you see, what do you see?
Yeah. It's a great question. I would go further than the 3 Bs. I'd say the 4 Bs, because in I think 2013, the World Small Animal Veterinary Association came out with a criticism of raw food, and they said they had 4 major criticisms, and they said benefits, bugs, balance, and bones were their criticisms. They said there's no benefits. There's a problem with, and your 3 Bs, bugs, balance, and bones. They said there's a problem that there's too many bugs in it, and that's going to cause infection, but it doesn't. Balance is an issue. No, it's not. If you give variety, balance is not an issue. And bones, they say bones are going to cause perforations and blockages and what have you. And the epidemiology, the studies do not bear that out. So there you go. Benefit, bugs, balance, and bones is my 4 Bs. So let's have a look. You were asking about. Sorry, I've gone. I'm ranting here, Ian.
That's all right. That's okay. You nutritional deficiencies and/or
nutritional deficiencies. Yes.
Are you diagnosing these in raw-fed animals? Are you diagnosing these in animals fed commercial foods?
Yes, I am. And yeah, and I'm mystified actually, and this is something at some point I'd love to talk to you about what's in the future, and I've written some notes, and one of them is I see quite a lot of dogs, kibble dogs and raw dogs, bizarrely, who are low in either B12 or folate. As regards copper, selenium, calcium, phosphorus, what have you, I don't see deficiencies of the obvious micronutrients. But when it comes to those vitamins in particular, we do see on a reasonably frequent basis. And I wonder whether you see this in Australia. Do you see folate? Sorry.
Could I just jump in? Are you seeing these as clinical phenomena, like where the animal is actually showing clinical symptoms of these deficiencies, or are you simply measuring some parameter within the dog or within the food and making that call?
No, we're seeing sick dogs which, when are given B12 injections, improve with neurological signs or just with their general demeanor. So,
let me jump in there for a second, Nick. These dogs are being fed raw?
Yep, some of them are.
Well, just concentrating on the raw-fed dogs, is this home-fed raw or is it commercial raw?
Both. Yeah, and I've looked into it, and my thoughts for if you like, is that as regards, so folate is absorbed in the duodenum. Just, it goes in and you absorb it. If you've got duodenal inflammation, then you get a reduced folate absorption. However, B12 is a much more interesting character. What I'll just keep it simple for everybody who's watching. B12 relies on a protein to take it through the acid environment of the stomach. It is then relies on so it means you've got to have good stomach health. It then relies on the pancreas to produce pepsin, and there's some pepsin and pepsinogen from the stomach as well, which then breaks off that envoy molecule through the stomach, and it gets linked onto a molecule called intrinsic factor, which takes it through the length of the small intestine, and the intrinsic factor then allows it to be absorbed into the bloodstream at the far end of the small intestine. Okay, so it's quite a complicated absorption. If you've got small intestinal bacterial overgrowth because the dog has had antibiotics, and it could be just one course of antibiotics could do the trick, or maybe it's had Giardia or what have you. But if you've got some kind of bacterial overgrowth, some kind of dysbiosis, then the B12, the cobalamin, can be eaten up by the bugs, and thus it doesn't reach the end of the small intestine and doesn't get absorbed. And so I think there's quite a lot going on there. Is it to do now? The average raw dog is going to have a healthier stomach and they're going to have a healthier pancreas, and is less likely to have an antibiotic. So perhaps these raw dogs that I'm seeing.
We lost you, Nick. Well, I'm not sure what's happened to Nick, but
you are there. I'm not
you
sure
there?
whether you disappeared. Yeah, you disappeared for a second there. So
we both did.
They have a poor, perhaps a skewed microbiome, or maybe they've had antibiotics in the past before they went on raw. That part of the puzzle is not clear to me right now, and that's something that I'd like to look at in the future.
Let me jump in there for a moment. I suspect, I'm not sure why that is happening, because in Australia, I'm not seeing that problem. What about your pet medics? Have they talked about this as a problem with raw?
The raw, not really. It's not something that we've focused on. And to be honest, it's something that I've just been thinking about and haven't. I mean, I've researched it, and I know a little bit about B12, and I know a little bit about folate, but I'm still a little bit mystified. And it is something that I will share with the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society as a whole, actually, in order to try and gather to see whether other people are seeing it. I see it.
Yeah,
probably
okay.
Once a month, at least once a month, twice a month, something like that.
I'm okay. I would love to jump in here and just say that my suspicion, when I see things like this, is that people are following some aberrant way of feeding raw that doesn't actually adhere to evolutionary principles. They're not feeding enough bone. They're not feeding enough offal.
Yeah.
These are the things that people end up feeding some simplified version of raw, and quite often they're throwing in a bit of cooked food or a bit of dry food just to be sure. And as soon as that happens, they start to really destroy the paradigm. But look, let's move on from that. You're seeing a lot of animals now that are raw fed, and I'm also now seeing Rob Ryan throw in his head, and I think Rob Ryan has something he wants to say. Rob, it's lovely to see you.
This is a great discussion. We have about 10 minutes, and we have a few questions. So would you guys be okay if we took some questions?
I think that'd be a great idea, Rob. Let's go for it.
Of course.
Great. Well, we have our first question out off YouTube Live is from Eileen. She says many raw feeders are struggling with inflation in the UK, especially those who have been home formulating or do it yourself. When budgets are squeezed, what are your top tips for making the food bowl go further? Great question.
Well, Nick, you're in the UK, so I think we've got to leave that one to you.
Okay, great. I would say tripe. Use more tripe. Now, there are two types of tripe at least: lamb tripe and beef tripe. And I would say, and it tends to be very, very cheap. So you could lean more heavily until perhaps the economy improves by looking at tripe. Be careful about getting cheap meat, because it's cheap for a reason. And so if you do see people selling cheap meat, just be sure it hasn't fallen off the back of some lorry somewhere, just to be on the safe side. So the other thing would be organ meats. If your dog eats organ meats and they really enjoy it, try increasing that organ meat. Obviously, as part of variation, so that we don't have any excesses or deficiencies, but increasing organ meat. If you examine a sheep's carcass and you take all the bladder and all the organ tissue, it comes to about 25% of the total body weight. And we're talking thymus, we're talking lymph nodes, we're talking salivary glands, everything. If you take everything, it's up to about 25%. And typically in an 80-10-10, we've got 10% organ meat. So you might well be able to push that up into the 15s and 18s. Liver tends to make the gut loose, so just be a bit careful with that. And obviously, if you feed lamb's liver and the dog doesn't get on well with it, don't feed lamb's liver. Try pork liver, try beef liver. That's a good idea. Also heart. Heart tends to be really, really cheap and is fantastic. Essentially, you can use it as a meat. It's a specialized meat. It's very high in coenzyme Q10 and taurine and choline and all these amazing things, but it's cheap and it's meat. So you might well be able to stretch things by using viscera. Viscera is cheap bowl filler, but you know it is pretty rich. Heart you'll probably get away with, and you can use that as a meat. But also think about you can get tongue. Think more broadly. You know what organ meats are we not using? Have a chat with your butcher, see what he can get hold of. Lung, testicles, spleen. You know, all these things are usually tossed aside or not used. They are wonderful, wonderful food, and I suspect very, very cheap.
And not only that, Nick, I'll just jump in there. All those wonderful things you've just spoken about are giving you that broad range of foods that are required to get that balance right. And they're going to contain a lot of things we don't yet know about, but are important. But let me also say, soft bones, if they're cheap, get those in the diet as well, because they're very important for dogs chewing, for their mental health, for the microbiome, the whole thing. So soft bones from young animals. And if they're cheap, get those into your dog as well, because I called my first book, Give Your Dog a Bone, for a very important reason. The bone contains many brilliant nutrients for your dog. And I won't go into that now because we've only got a few minutes. Rob, can we move to the next question?
Yeah, excellent. That was great. Great job, Nick, on the suggestions.
Just before Rob jumps in there, Ian, I would say bone broth is really great value as well. You can get bones very cheaply, put them in the pan, boil them up for 48 hours to get all the nutrients out of the bone into the dog, into the solution, and you can put those as ice cubes. They can be treats. You can fill the bowl more because of the liquid volume in there. That's great. You can home ferment. You know, obviously Rob's got a lovely product. He's done all the hard work for you, but you can ferment sauerkraut at home very, very simply, and you can fill the bowl with some really lovely kimchi, sauerkraut type things. I've got a book here by an Aussie called Holly Davis, Davis, and she gives you some great recipes for fermenting products. But you'll go online and you'll find, or have a chat with Rob, and he'll see you right, I'm sure.
Thanks, Nick. That's great.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Let's take this this next question here. It's actually non-raw related, but I thought it was. This is about a raw-fed dog. It's from Eileen Davies. Thank you, Eileen, for your question. Her dog is raw-fed, has lumps on his gums. Can cryosurgery be a solution without having to extract teeth?
Sounds like a boxer. Would you think, Nick?
Yeah, well, it might be. It sounds like epulus. There's a disease. It's a bit like proud flesh in horses. It's not a cancer growth, but it's just an exuberance of tissue. And I have one case where we used CBD. We rubbed CBD onto epulus, and we had a great result. So N equals 1, but saves you surgery. So that's definitely worth a go. Otherwise, really, it's just due to chronic irritation in the periodontal space, and the tissue kind of comes out like this. If the epulus is not causing a problem, and the dog is old, I would be suspicious of surgery. But if the dog is early midlife and they're really getting out in the way, then I think surgery, either cryosurgery or just regular scalpel surgery to clear the mouth. And then after that, it's really important to make sure that you've got bones on a regular basis, as Ian was wisely saying just now. bones on a regular basis, but also Connor's got a lovely product called Canident, which it helps to soften tartar. We're trying to keep those teeth as clean as possible, and that's really, really important. Possibly even some probiotics. There are some nice probiotics by Lucaa, Lucaa, probiotic spray. Anything you can do to keep that mouth and the teeth and the periodontal space clean, so that you don't get more epulus there, Eileen. That's the place that I would go. And Leon, any thoughts from your years of experience with these things?
No, I think you've really. I've just learned something about CBD oil. Everything you've just said, I totally agree with.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Well, we have another question. It happens to be, this is someone who has received or is receiving, I think, a sample of Gussie's gut and wants to know. Her name's Corey King from Facebook. She says she's got a sample. Oh, it's on its way. And how do I think of your supplement in the whole raw food regime?
Ian, I'm going to hand this to you because I haven't received any. I'm sure mine are in the post as well, and I'm really excited to try them. I've been mad keen on fermented food ever since I read Catherine Shanahan's book Deep Nutrition. That was, I was kind of thinking, yeah, fermented foods is a great thing, but reading her book, game changer. Catherine Shanahan, Dr. Catherine Shanahan, Deep Nutrition is a game changer. Ian, you'd love it. It's a really, really deep thinking book.
Writing that one down, Nick. Thank you.
Good man. Good man. So yeah, spill the beans, Ian. What do you reckon with the Gussie's gut?
The answer is quite short, really, because as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of like the missing link within the raw paradigm. It's the last thing that we really haven't concentrated on, or I certainly haven't during my lectures. I've mentioned the fact that we ought to have it, but finding a suitable way to get fermented foods in it, because a lot of dogs don't like the taste of sauerkraut or kimchi, and I'm not always sure that dairy probiotics are that great for some dogs. They can be, but this way we are actually able to get very close, maybe, to feeding that rumen contents that we're talking about, or the gut contents, the fermenting gut contents of an animal that's being fed on real food, on green foods. And I just mentioned that in our anti-aging formula, for example, we've got lovely, beautiful fermented kale, spinach, parsley. I'm just reading this off a list, something that Rob and I talked about for a long time. Green cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, wild blueberries, rosemary, oregano, or oregano, as they say in the States, grass-fed goat kefir, alfalfa, kelp, and a little bit of Romano cheese for taste. So it's the missing link. It's the thing that we need to, if we can throw that in, it's acting as a probiotic and a prebiotic. It's easy, and throw it we hope that it's going to be a benefit to those who still prefer to feed kibble. And we're going to wait and see on that one. We believe it will, because anything that improves the gut and the microbiome has to improve health. And for the raw feeder, it's going to be the icing on the cake. It's the one thing that's been missing for a long time as a constant. And using that word constant, we have to feed this sort of food constantly. It doesn't have to be every day, but it has to seed the gut on a constant basis, because that's the way this whole raw paradigm works. You don't have to have a complete and balanced diet at every meal, but over time, keep it constant, in that the constants, of course, is variety. So it's constantly varied. But it's constantly got a basis of raw meaty bones, because they are the basis of a carnivorous diet for a dog. It has the vegetable material. These products, these fermented products, don't replace vegetables, but they add to them. Vegetables still have their own unique role to play. So this is the missing link, and that's where I see it fitting in.
That's fantastic. My 2.5-year-old Whippet, for the first time, took down a hair about 2 weeks ago, and it was really interesting, very distressing to see, but good for her. But it was very interesting to see. The first thing she did was open the abdomen and start sucking on the small
Wow.
intestine. It's greeny material. You remember the scene from Lady and the Tramp where they're sucking the spaghetti between the two of them. She did that with this hair, okay, with this
Oh, wow.
green material. And I just thought that's the ultimate probiotic, still warm from the beast.
Beautiful.
Beautiful indeed. Yes, yes.
And distressing all at once.
Indeed, indeed.
But that's the way nature is. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, these are really great questions. We don't have much more time, so I'll let you guys. We've about 2 more questions. I wish I could have gotten to. So thank you everybody for submitting those. I'll let you both end the broadcast and give some final words.
Nick, I want to ask you in a sort of a final way, where do you see the raw paradigm heading? What have we got to do, in your opinion, to make a greater acceptance of this way of feeding as genuinely scientific, genuinely healthy, and genuinely the way people ought to think about feeding if they want true health for their dogs? How do we move forward with this?
I thought you might ask me that question. So, Ian, I've written there's my answer. So I can't do it briefly, but just let's have a look. What is the future? So the future will be to investigate the things like the pancreas. Why are we seeing so much pancreatitis? Why are we seeing B12 and folate? What are the populations who are having that? I'm seeing that we are getting more and more research. I want more and more research. Therefore, we need funding. We need to talk to all the raw food producers and say, come on, guys, please contribute, because when we do research, you and everybody else in the raw feeding community benefits. People like Dog Risk up at Helsinki University, they are doing some wonderful work, but they're short of funds. So I think we need to somehow think about tapping the enthusiasm of the raw feeding community and fitting those guys with these researchers who are equally enthusiastic, but they need the money to do that research. We need to engage with people who haven't discovered the joy of raw food, and they haven't looked at the pros and cons of raw, the pros and cons of kibble, the pros and cons of tinned food. The future is but for Connor and Brendan and I on RPM to move in the future and do much more education, maybe do more webinars and things like this. Raw Safe is a group in the UK who are auditing raw. They've got 12 raw producers in the UK. They are sending in inspectors randomly. These people sign up to say, we are top notch and you can come and visit us anytime to inspect our premises. And so that's Raw Safe. I think it's rawsafe.co.uk or rawsafe.com. Check them out. They're amazing. I think regenerative farming is the future, and I'm sure that the raw feeding community could work with the regenerative farming community. I think we humans should be eating nose to tail, and I think we should be feeding our dogs nose to tail much more. And in the future, I'd like to read more. The more I read, the more I realize I know very little, and so I'd like to read more in the future. So there you go. That's a very brief run through.
That's fabulous, Nick. Thank you so much. And from my point of view, I can see that raw feeding is in very safe hands with you out there and your raw medics. It is absolutely fabulous to see this. The seed planted so long ago is blossoming beautifully. For today, I want to thank Rob and Gussie's Gut for making this possible. But mostly Nick, well, let me not diminish Rob and Gussie's Gut. They're doing much to forward the raw food movement by allowing these sort of chats to happen. So thank you, Rob, and thank you, Nick, for today. Absolutely brilliant. And yes, I can see that the raw feeding movement is safe in the hands of people such as yourself.
Bless you. It's been a blast. It's been a blast, Ian. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Rob, for allowing us to chat. I always really enjoy speaking to Ian. Whenever we get together, we never stop. We we have these kind of chats over breakfast, over conference, over a beer. Just couldn't be better. It's a joy. Thank you, Ian. And thanks, Rob, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Rob, over to you.